The Kings fall in their first game of this 3-game road trip in Oklahoma City, 127-113. And this was an extremely disappointing loss for me because it just felt like we didn't give ourselves a chance to win this game when we very easily could have. And it just was because certain guys weren't locked in at certain times in this game. And the Kings weren't locked in to start the game. Or at least, no, I take that back. I think a lot of the Kings were locked in and ready to play right away. And I thought the team was playing actually really good team defense. They were getting deflections, and they got their first, 4 points of the game. And then it was just De'Aaron Fox. The De'Aaron Fox disaster class in the first quarter. Doesn't get out to 2 3-point shooters, so allows 6 points there. Then just gets blown by Lou Dort, then gets back cut. So he was responsible by himself for allowing 10 of the first 14 points for OKC. And he wasn't doing anything offensively either. And so he got pulled really early for Davion Mitchell, earlier than he normally does. Obviously, he still comes out pretty early in the game in the normal rotation, but you could just tell he wasn't locked in. So Mike Brown pulled him. And even when he was in the game, like the offense then after those first 4 points, it just looked a little out of sync. Like guys not having good spacing, but it wasn't to the point of being worried yet. It's just, okay, you have a few bad possessions early on, and one guy makes individual mistakes defensively. You put yourself in a bit of a hole early, but they could very easily climb out of it. And that's exactly what happened because Malik Monk came in, settled things down, knocking down his shot, and the Kings defense, like it had been earlier, remained super active and looked great. Again, apart from those 4 possessions of Fox kind of just falling apart. And Sabonis was just dominating inside. The Thunder have no answer, and that's why I think this is such a good matchup for the Kings, and one that I would love for the Kings to get in the playoffs. And that's exactly why I'm disappointed that the Kings didn't really, they had a chance late, but why I'm disappointed they didn't have a better chance late to win this game. And the Kings were definitely struggling against SGA, but after a shaky start, they got it back to a 2-point game. By the end of the first quarter, it was 29-27, and then I think they even tied it up, 29-29. And then Sabonis goes out of the game. Fox comes back in. SGA also goes out of the game. And boom, 12-0 run for the Thunder. And so that right there is why this game was disappointing, because in the first half, the Kings looked really solid with Sabonis on the court, even when SGA was on the court for the Thunder. Then they both go out, and De'Aaron Fox can't even keep this team even with the Thunder. And the Thunder go on a massive run with SGA on the bench and with De'Aaron Fox on the court. And it's just so annoying to watch how often this happens with De'Aaron lately. He had 41 against Chicago. Great. He had a solid game in the last one against Denver where he scored 15, had 10 assists, and had a great game defensively. Great. That's awesome. But it feels like for every good or great game he has 2 or 3 just horrible games in between. And this game was horrible on both ends for him, and he only turned it on in the fourth quarter. He had 7 points going into the fourth quarter and finished with 15 points, 5 assists, and he had 3 turnovers. He went 2 for 8 from 3. Both of those makes were in the fourth quarter. He was just settling from deep, and he just was not very engaged defensively. The Kings were down 10 at halftime, and I feel like that was kind of single-handedly because Fox wasn't playing well. Fox was a negative 27 in this game, and Davion Mitchell was a plus 23. And that's about right. Because when you look at everything else, they couldn't stop Sabonis inside. He had another triple-double, 21, 14, 11. He had some bad turnovers for sure, but they couldn't stop him. Barnes was attacking Chet, especially in that third quarter, and using his body to get into him and actually get to the free throw line. You had Keegan, who couldn't hit a 3 early on, but was getting inside and attacking. You had Monk coming off the bench and just knocking down every shot. You had Davion come off the bench, knock down every shot. You had Keon Ellis come off the bench and give really positive contributions. And so this was just such a winnable game that the Kings let get away. Way too many turnovers. Like I said, Sabonis had those bad turnovers. Malik Monk also had some really bad turnovers. Fox had some bad turnovers, just throwing it to the Thunder. And the Thunder punished the Kings in transition. And I've talked about it before, how I think the Kings, more than any other team, have offense connected to defense. If they aren't playing well offensively, they will get destroyed on the other end. And that has a lot to do with allowing so many runs. There was a 12-0 run in the second quarter by the Thunder, and then I think it was at least a 12-0 run, I think 14-0 for the Thunder in the third quarter, and they just happen in an instant. And it's the NBA. I get it, these runs happen, but it happens to the Kings a lot. And a large part of it, well, I would say there's two big parts of it. One is the Kings are horrible in transition defending, and when the momentum is against them, they just cannot seem to do anything right defensively. And then they try to stop the runs by going for the big home run three-pointers instead of just slowing things down when they need to slow it down, or even pushing the pace but then getting to the paint. And so that's what led to these big runs happening in both halves. And those big runs were the difference, because the rest of the game the Kings either played even or were outplaying the Thunder. And those runs are the same reason that earlier in the season we were getting blown out so much by teams like the Pelicans or the Clippers. But at least with those teams, you had the excuse of just having it be a bad matchup. But that's just not the case here. The Kings had won the previous 8 games against Oklahoma City, which is pretty crazy because usually those stats are the other way around, especially when it's like Eastern Conference teams against the Kings, obviously, because you don't play them as much. And so it's not like I came into this game just expecting a win, right? Like the Thunder were favored. They were at home. We'd won the previous 2. They're still a really good team, but it's just how it felt like we had the opportunity to outplay them, and we were at certain points, and then we would just go totally away from what was working and allow these massive runs to happen. And then we would eventually get back to what was working, getting inside, and we would have to just claw our way back slowly into the game. There were a lot of defensive miscommunications for the Kings in this one. You saw a lot of just back cuts that weren't getting picked up. You saw a lot of drives where there would just be no help. You saw multiple Kings closing out to a non-shooter, to be honest. Like late, there was a play where Jalen Williams, J-Will, had the ball at the three-point line, and just 2 Kings go flying at him. Like, why? I mean, why would one King even go flying at him? He's not a good three-point shooter. And so there were definitely a lot of just mental mistakes defensively. After the game against the Pistons, Mike Brown talked about how there was no need to change the game plan because the Kings just didn't execute the game plan. And I thought this was a perfect example of it on both ends of the court, where the game plan coming in was great. It was to exploit the mismatches that we have inside, and it worked to a certain extent. And then just on both ends of the floor, at times in this game, the Kings just didn't execute that game plan at all. On the defensive side, the Kings conceded so many switches way too easily against SGA, and then they allowed him to get to the middle of the floor, and there was no help there. The amount of times that SGA would get around the big, whether it was Lyles or whoever, and then there would be no help there, and he would just get to the middle of the floor and score really easily. It happened with JDub as well. The same thing, getting around whoever got switched onto him and just getting to the middle of the floor. Mike Brown's defensive philosophy is you do not concede the middle of the floor. And it happened against the Pistons, and it happened here again, of when guards were coming around the screen, the bigs, Sabonis, Lyles, whoever it was, just didn't do a good enough job of containing them to whatever side of the court they were on. We saw some interesting lineups for the Kings that we had not seen before, and that was Davion and Keon being out there together. And we saw Keon pretty early because Davion picked up 2 fouls against SGA. So Keon came in for Davion, and Keon was playing well. Davion had been playing well. So then they both get out there together because obviously things are not working for the Kings defensively. And so they need guys that are going to be able to get after it defensively and have active hands and try to be able to disrupt SGA especially, but just what the Thunder are trying to do. And so we saw both of them out there. We saw Fox out there with both of them as well. So going really small. We saw Monk as well out there with those two guys. And we also saw a lot of those two guys because Kevin Huerter had a really rough game. He was a big part of not helping correctly or not getting out to a shooter. He had a really rough game, I thought, on both ends of the floor. He only had 4 points. His shot wasn't going down. He turned the ball over, just had that one play where he just threw it out of bounds when Barnes wasn't looking, and Barnes was never looking at him. So I don't know how that happened. But it's the defensive side that I feel like we haven't seen Huerter play this poorly in a long time. Because it's one thing if Huerter gets switched onto SGA and then SGA burns him or something like that. Or the same with JDub and JDub just like out-muscles him. But it was about the decision-making and the team defense portion of it that usually he's much better at, and he just was not performing well at all. And that's why he only played 17 minutes. And it's kind of similar for Harrison Barnes in playing 21 minutes. It's slightly different. Like, he picked up 3 fouls in the first half. And so they took him out. He was playing well offensively. And, you know, his defense against Chet, I thought at times was pretty good. Although in the first, or the second half, I mean, the Thunder immediately went to Chet against Barnes in the post and Chet scored. But that was, you know, only one play. But I just think Barnes' lack of mobility, I mean, it always hurts the Kings' defense, but I think it especially hurt in this one. And there were just moments, especially in transition, where he either just wasn't quick enough and would allow the Thunder to get inside. Sabonis had some of those moments which you don't normally see. Like, normally Domas is really good defensively, and he just wasn't in this game. And that's kind of part of what I was talking about in the Kings falling apart in transition defensively. There was one play in the third quarter where Sabonis knocked down that shot clock beating 3, and then I don't know exactly what happened, if he just wasn't awake or something, like wasn't paying attention, but Chet just drives down the other end. It seems like Sabonis kind of got blocked by like Harrison Barnes a bit, but that shouldn't have mattered, and Sabonis just wasn't able to get in front of him, and Chet just goes to the rim and scores. And that happened too much in the third quarter during that big Thunder run that happened. And the Kings started the third quarter really well, getting it down from 10 to 6, and they got it down to 6 2 separate times, so it's not like they just scored the first 2 and then got blown out for there. But it felt like the same recipe each time. The Kings would get down big and then make a run, where they would make a bit of a run and then they would chuck up a few bad threes, and then the Thunder would come down and hit a 3. Fox had multiple times where he just killed momentum by chucking up a bad 3 when everyone else had it going offensively. And then the Thunder would come down and immediately kill all that momentum. But big shout out to Davion Mitchell, who came in, played 20 minutes, and hit all 4 of his threes. He had 11 points in the fourth quarter. He had just a super quick 8 points, 2 threes. Also hit a nice floater to begin the fourth quarter. Also got a steal, leading to a Fox and 1 opportunity. I say opportunity because, of course, he missed the free throw, was 1 for 3 from the free throw line this game. But Davion was just everywhere. He tried to guard Shea. That didn't really work. And it's just a bad matchup. Davion cannot guard SGA. Like, he had some good moments where he'd get a contest or whatever, but SGA is just too big for him, too long for him. And so that's why Keon's probably the better guy to try to defend him. But Keon came in within a second, picked up a foul on a rip-through move from SGA, and then he just couldn't stay in front of him. Or when he did, SGA would just push off with his off arm and step back and hit it. I was interested coming into the game, who would guard SGA? Is it Fox? Is it Keegan? I thought it would be Fox because Fox has been playing really well defensively lately. It was, and Fox just had a horrible game defensively. They went to Keegan for 1 play, and we're like, okay, no, that's not working. So pretty much the Kings just couldn't find anyone to guard SGA, and that was a big problem. They can still win a game when SGA is going off. There's no doubt. I mean, they did it last time. But when Fox only has 15 points, and when you allow Jalen Williams to also go off, then that's going to be really tough. I think Keegan had a bit of a rough game on the perimeter defensively, but he was really good with his help defense inside or chasing down guys and getting his hands on shots or just altering shots inside. But he got beat on the perimeter a few times pretty badly, which doesn't normally happen. But he had 10 rebounds. He's pretty dominant inside against smaller defenders. I was happy to see Keon get the minutes he did. He got 17 minutes. Part of it maybe is because Sasha Vezenkov is out again, which really sucks. He tweaked his ankle again, so he's back for one game, then in practice tweaked it again, and he's going to be out for a bit, which sucks just because it feels like every time he's on the court, he's making positive contributions. But that should free up more minutes for Keon, and Keon came in and was just super active defensively, getting his hands on, felt like everything. It felt like the Kings just were super active with their hands in this game and were getting deflections. And then the ball just was not bouncing to them. It just, every time they would hit the ball out of a Thunder player's hands, it would just go right to another Thunder player. It felt like all game that was happening. Also, Keegan, he just has slow hands. You know, when you talk about Keon and Fox having really fast hands, Keegan, the opposite. He cannot grab any loose balls. And that's why, as a defender, he's going to put his body in front and he's going to contest a shot. He's not going to be going for steals like Fox does, which Mike Brown talked about in a press conference a little earlier. Maybe it was last game or 2 games ago. It was nice to see Malik Monk come in and be able to knock down threes, because he hasn't been hitting threes at the same rate as he was earlier in the season, although he's been playing well these last few games. He's been relying a lot more on the mid-range because he hasn't been knocking down the threes, but he was knocking it down in this game, 6 for 10, and just was providing much-needed offense where Fox wasn't providing that. Trey Lyles, I thought, had a bit of a rough game. He wasn't knocking down he didn't take many shots, had 1 point. Nice. That's great. You know, the 1 point stat line, 1 for 2 from the free throw line. Not great. But I also thought he got beat a lot on the perimeter defensively. So it just wasn't one of his best games. At least the Kings showed a little bit of fight, you know, towards the end. Davion trying to bring us back into the game. I really wanted us to win this one just for it to be the Davion Mitchell game, you know. But if we're going to lose, at least we showed fight in the end, and at least it was Davion Mitchell and Keon Ellis coming in and having really positive contributions. And so if we're going to lose, I guess that's the way you want to lose, because hopefully it means we can see Davion Mitchell growing in confidence, and we can see more Keon Ellis minutes, because it just feels like every time Keon comes in and plays, he's playing really well. And honestly, it feels kind of tough that a large portion of the games where he's gotten big minutes are against the Thunder, so he has to just go out there and guard SGA all the time. Like, give him a game where he doesn't have to guard someone like that. Look, if there's going to be a game between this one and the next one that we were going to win, I'd rather win in Phoenix. Of course, it would have been nice to be able to beat OKC and then maybe, you know, start a charge towards the top 4. But I think it's always more likely that we're probably not going to reach the top 4 and we're going to stay around the 5 to 8 range, 8 or 9, whatever it is. I can't remember. I think it's 5, 6, 7, 8 that are close. And so Phoenix, this next game in Phoenix is big. And that game that we just totally threw away in Phoenix last time hurts so much, because obviously we're just losing one game to Phoenix, and that's, you know, it's a 2-game swing there. But also, we could have locked up the tiebreaker against Phoenix right there. That would have been 3-0 against Phoenix on the season. But now, you know, we got to win one of these next 2 games against Phoenix. We play them 5 times this season because of the in-season tournament. The same with the Pelicans, because of the way getting to the quarterfinals in the IST worked. But yeah, that game hurts, so we got to make up for it. Played Phoenix well for 2 3/4 games, right? So hopefully, you know, that 1 quarter isn't indicative of how things will go in the future against the Suns. But it is a game on TNT. And the reason that I think that's a good thing is I think Fox gets up a little bit for the national television games. I think there's a little more hype, hopefully also seeing them being close to us in the standings and realizing it's an important game has everyone locked in. I think one win condition in this type of game is Sabonis just absolutely dominating Nurkic inside on both ends. Like, you can't let Nurkic be getting anything on the offensive end, and then you have to go at him on defense, because he's a big weakness for them. And so if we don't exploit that weakness, then it's going to be really tough, obviously, to win against Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, if you let someone like Nurkic also get going. There's been a lot of talk recently about the Kings' three-point defense and how bad it is. And so closeouts are going to be really key because you have to close out, obviously, against Beal, Booker, and Durant. But once you get put in rotation against three guys out there who can score the way they can, like you saw it against, I was watching the game against the Warriors, which they ended up losing, but it was just Devin Booker like dribbling around for a whole possession, but then kicking it out to Bradley Beal, who then gets closed out on and takes a dribble into the mid-range and then scores in the mid-range. And so when you have a guy in Bradley Beal that's just sitting out there in the corner as a shooter, but then with 5 seconds on the shot clock can just create something out of nothing because he exploits a closeout. That's why the way the Kings close out against those guys is going to be really important, because with that many scorers on the court, or that many elite scorers, it's really important to not get put in rotation that much, or at least not be closing out as hard against the other guys on the team and make them beat you. But anyways, that is it for this episode of the Roll Report. I will be back on Tuesday to recap that game against the Phoenix Suns. So I'll see you then. Peace.